Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the weekly Restitutor Orbis live stream on the channel. And this week, our topic is the 1700s Eerie events. I'd like to extend a thanks to everybody for joining us and hope you can all hear me just fine. I'd like to also extend a welcome to all Prime Explorers, channel members, viewers, and all others joining us for this live stream. So I thought we would go back to the 1700s and take a look at it because of the main reason that we oftentimes focus on the 1800s. But we do have some events in the 1700s that tend to be, how shall we say, foundational. Starting with the Age of Revolution, which is what we look at the late 1700s. Now, does anybody know what kind of revolutions we had going on in the late 1700s? And it's great to see everybody, and thank you for joining us. And so what are your thoughts on that? I mean, we think of the main revolution of the 1700s, which, if you're from the United States, of course, it's been instructed. You've learned in history class that the American Revolution, the United States Declaration of Independence, was one of the biggest revolutions. But why was it so important? What did it really matter, and what was it about? Hey, Sky Sage, good to see you. Hey, Cecilia, welcome. And Jamie, I saw you earlier. Hey, thanks for that, Random. So we got 5 more that are joining the membership group. So you can thank Random FX for that. I appreciate it. Revolution was more recent. Yeah, that's a good point, Robert. It does seem to be a little bit more recent, doesn't it? Hey, Julia, good to see you. Hey, Casey. And why do we think it's more recent? Well, we have this image of these founding fathers in the United States, and we're told to really venerate these founding fathers. And, that's not any kind of controversial statement, I don't believe, because every history class, even to this day, the founding fathers, whether we're talking about Benjamin Franklin or Thomas Jefferson, who was the architect of the Declaration of Independence, there were a lot of founding ideas, if you will, and you'll get that word a lot with the American Revolution. Founding ideas of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that was supposedly derived from the Enlightenment, which was an intellectual practice that came from the 1600s. Although if you're a channel member, you'll know that the Enlightenment wasn't all that. Now, was it? Was it a break free from the Holy See or no? Honestly, Jamie, it seems like it was just business as usual, and perhaps you could say it was another variation of it. That's my honest opinion, but it seems to be that they wanted to give the impression that it was a break, but it wasn't. We had this revolution. We had to get rid of all these old institutions and systems. And then once we signed the Constitution, we're right back into those systems. Hey, Robert, good to see you. Oh, look at that, KC933. Good comment there. Pursuit of land. Yes, and in a lot of respects, it was. Oh, good one there, Albie Belt. Yes. Snake Plissken, president of what? You know what? And he was right in a lot of ways. President of what? Beatles revolution. Yeah, when we get to the 1960s, there's no doubt about it. Yeah, first Free Masonic Lodge of England, 1717. It was all downhill from there. Yeah, that was part of it, Lawrence. Although when we looked at all these organizations that we had, we don't want to forget about our favorite International Society of Oddfellows now, do we? Yeah, refacing and no revolt. And I think that's a lot of what we had, Jamie. But why? Why did it happen? Was it because we were starting everything new, or was there something that was already in existence? We were created to give industrialists cheap labor. And that's a very good comment, Robert, because that was the other revolution we had going on, was the Industrial Revolution. Now they say that the Industrial Revolution and all these technological advancements came from Great Britain or the United Kingdom, prior to it being the United Kingdom. Yeah, the anti-Masonic party. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe they're just all different variations of different institutions for all we know. So, well, thanks for joining us, Jalalo, and appreciate that. Hey, Fairy Girl, good to see you again. And so, what does it mean? Is it any kind of new order, or when it's the Age of Revolution? Were these architects just simply people who were designated to give this new ideal of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and they were selling these ideas to the people? Well, let's look at some of the other revolutions we may not think of. For example, the Haitian Revolution, and that was where Haiti actually revolted against France. France, which had itself a great revolution, Bastille Day, which is coming up soon on the 14th of July, when they stormed the Bastille. And yet people don't think of the French Revolution as being a bloodless affair, now do they? Now, the Haitian Revolution was an example of what was formerly considered a colonial possession successfully revolting. But oddly enough, when you see the painted pictures of it, it seems to give you a different impression. For example, you see some of the revolutionaries that are wearing the unique uniforms of France. So is that exactly what was going on? Is it just another violent uprising? Was it suppressed? Was it really throwing the nation free of control, or is any nation free from control? That's always something I think we should think about. Ah, yes, Sky Sage, exactly. Whose pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness? Very good point. Hey, Catherine, opening a satellite location of the mother country under a new name. And you know what? There's probably a lot more reality behind that than we like to believe. Because that's what we get. We get a lot of dressed up things that have the superficial wrapping paper on it, and we're just not supposed to really think into it. Hey, Cynthia, good to see you, and thank you for sharing what you did earlier about the Daughters of the Revolution. And yes, honestly enough, to this day, there are still members of that organization that carry a lot of influence. So something to be aware of. But does the organization itself have any power, or is it just another organization for the sake of having organizations? Hey, Doc Shelley, good to see you. Hope things are going well in Oregon. Brother Adam, welcome. Glad you could join us. Ah, the creation of the Great Lakes in the 1500s. We're going to have to take a look at that because that's some interesting geography and map making that we have going on there. So, in any event, moving on. And we look at the events of the French Revolution, and people think, well, the French Revolution, it was a time of great transition when the people were throwing off the yoke of the French monarchy, the absolutist monarchy, as they called it, and it was supposed to be a grand time. And yet it quickly devolved into relentless violence, not just against the monarchy, but essentially against the entire class of aristocracy in France, or as they used to call them, the bourgeoisie. And sometimes they still do call them that. Very interesting image, though, we have here with the national razor, the guillotine, and that's what's most remembered from it. A time that they called the Terror. Now, again, was this actually a revolution that came up because of an absolutist monarch? Although, oddly enough, once Napoleon was defeated, because Napoleon was supposedly the result of this revolution. We got Napoleon, we had the French Empire. He stood up against Europe. He nearly conquered all of Europe for all time, threatened the other nations, and several coalitions defeated them. And then you might recall, he got a really nice retirement out of the deal. And he tried again, and they gave him another nice retirement. World revolutions, a world war against the free thinkers. And it is interesting how it feeds back into that pattern that you mentioned, Robert, of conflict, assimilation, and indoctrination. Everything starts with conflict of some sort. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a hard conflict or a conflict where people are engaging in violence. It's oftentimes now more of a soft conflict where we have animosity against each other, just thought animosity, if you will. But you can see how it starts here. Yeah, maybe, or maybe that was just something that they were again using to justify it because yeah, you do get the religious justification, especially the further back in the past that you go. But is it a legitimate one? Hard to say. Yeah, and you know what? You're all right to question it. There's a reason to question it because all these events overlap. I mean, this age of revolution is in a very compressed time frame. So what we're supposed to accept that the ideals of the Enlightenment just finally reached a boiling point? Hey, PCS World, thanks for joining us. And Elizabeth, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. But then we go to the very concept of whether we're looking at the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution of the United States, because which document truly freed the people? Was it the Declaration of Independence? Well, it's in the title, the Declaration of Independence, but what's the document that Americans are taught to venerate and hold in very high esteem? Well, it's the Constitution of the United States, starting with "We, the people." I'm doing my best William Shatner there from Star Trek Season 2, episode The Omega Glory. I really like the way William Shatner read that because he made the Constitution very dramatic. He had that talent. But what happened once the Constitution was written and imposed? What did we learn with Abraham Lincoln? What did he do to the original Constitution? If, again, we go off the official history. A business document. Yes, Catherine. And it does read like that, doesn't it? Oh, the Iroquois Nation. That's a good one, Sky Sage. Yes, the Iroquois Confederacy. Or whatever actual system of government they had. I think that's more of a label than anything when they talk about the tribal governments that they had. Oh, that's a good one there, Adam. Yeah, quiet weapons for silent wars. Weapons of ideas and ideals, if you will. Oh, look at that, Tony. Wonderful. Yes, three constitutions. So if you have three constitutions, if you have different documents, you have the Declaration of Independence, You have the original 1700s Constitution, which is what we're talking about here, and then the new one in the 1860s that good old Abraham Lincoln helped compose himself. Which one applies? I don't know. Yeah, amended. Yeah, that's one way of saying it, Barbara. No doubt about it. Hey, Georgie, thanks for joining us from New Zealand. We're going to be talking about New Zealand, actually, and the individual who, quote unquote, discovered it. We won't talk about the Maori that were already living there. Well, I'm glad you could join us. Oh, this is a good one from Robert. Made citizens into corporations and corporations citizens. Yes, very true. And actually, that is what it did. Oh, there's that terminology. So, does ratified matter? Does that terminology actually matter? Or are they just playing word games? Are they just playing document games to have us venerate these documents when in reality it's what we say goes in the moment? I mean, I'll leave that to you to decide, but you can certainly look at what happened in history, and that's the whole reason that we're doing that. Even the official history that we're given. Well, we had a Declaration of Independence. It wasn't good enough. The Articles of Confederation sucked. We need a Constitution. Well, the Constitution, while it was supposed to make everyone free and equal, it didn't. So we need to fight a civil war and we need to burn it. Even though, we say we shouldn't and it's the highest law of the land. If, you're acting in the spirit of righteousness, it's really not the highest law of the land. And so that's one of the reasons why I like to look at the Constitution and think about it. Oops, we skipped one there. Now, we go back to this time frame called the Terror in France. And was this really the result of all this hostility, all this animosity that had been building up towards the monarchy and the aristocracy in France? Or was it something else? Was it against a specific group of people who somehow may have, I don't know, been some sort of enclave or survivors of a previous civilization who were out there? I mean, maybe I'm going too far with that, but it's been something that I've suggested before. And maybe what we had in the 1700s was really the incipients. Now, remember, we don't know the exact timeline. Sure, we can accept the fact that the chronology, the exact years unfolded the way that we're told, but did they? Is 1780 really as far away from 1860 as we think? Or is the timeline expanded? Or are the years reported differently? If you go back and you watch the date paradox video, those are some of the theories. Because if you take all these events in quick succession, they actually make a lot more sense than they do in the official chronology. At least that's Aurelian's read of the situation, but I leave it to you. Oh, nice column over here. How fortuitous that they put this lovely column here in this painting. And I believe this is the beheading of Maximilian Robespierre, who was behind the terror, the reign of terror in France. He was featured briefly in Ridley Scott's lovely Napoleon movie, which you all know I'm a big fan of. So what are your thoughts on that? Ah, yes, took out the competition. And maybe that's what the guillotine was really about, for all we know. Ah, that could be too. Targeting specific people who had specific relations and maybe something that related back to the original alchemy, if you will. Because there were rumors that the alchemy or the old alchemy families were targeted. Now, it's hard to document that. Again, they're rumors, so take it with a grain of salt. Yeah, exactly. Well, the National Razor was a lot more efficient, wasn't it? Took the head of the snake. Yeah, probably right, Sky Sage. And definitely anyone who would be able to organize any sort of resistance. Yes. And you know what, Risha? I'm glad you mentioned that because what were those battles really about? Because official history tells us there were major battles before Napoleon came to power. Now, of course, he participated in these battles, and that's how he came to power because he showed himself to be this military genius. And we're definitely going to have to look into France a lot more because France has an interesting official historical account itself. But then somehow it's also tied closely to the United States. And, whether you're talking about Lafayette or Alexis de Tocqueville and Tocqueville, probably not pronouncing it correctly. And that's okay. I've got Scottish on the brain tonight. So don't mind me. I'm mispronouncing French words. It's okay. Christopher Lambert can show up and laugh at me. But the observations that they had of the United States and the way that these revolutions seem to happen in a very unique format, and also the special relationship that existed between the United States and France at this time. What is meant with old alchemy families? So, Fairy Girl, if you look up what you had in what we think of as the Middle Ages, there were a lot of families who had special knowledge of how to perform alchemy. And there's even rumors that they had the ability to expand the mind. And oddly enough, this relates back to last week's live stream with the Lawnmower Man. There's a line that actor Jeff Fahey delivers in the role of Job where he says, "We're not doing anything new. We're simply reawakening the brain that was known to the old families." And so one of the theories is that the old alchemy families actually had the knowledge from the old civilization. They had enhanced technological capabilities. They could do a lot of the things that to us seem, or at least we're told or informed, are impossible. And so, if you think about that, what's the whole point of these revolutions? What's the point of this terror? It's to target these people. And as Sky Sage said, to remove anyone who could give you any sort of organized opposition. Yeah, I mean, and they call it that, but is that really what it is, KC-933, or is that just a scare tactic, if you will? It's really hard to say. Yeah, well, I'm not talking about King Charles. I mean, anything from that time frame, and especially going back to the English Civil War and how Thomas Hobbes used that to justify his Leviathan, you can realize that a lot of that just seems to be a load of misinformation. But I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, and different forms of power and control, Laura. Absolutely. Yeah, maybe. And he definitely wrote some very obvious stories about it. So it's a good question. And we don't know. I mean, we have ideas of how well alchemy could work and if it works like they told us. I mean, imagine what you could do. Perhaps alchemical processes are the real ways, the manners that the materials, the construction materials for these old world buildings were actually conceived and conducted, and they're lost processes. And that's why, and oddly enough, it relates to later in the exploration, why we can't reproduce them today. We don't have the knowledge anymore. We'll try to imitate it or emulate it like we do with everything else, but it's really hard to say. But it's a good question. Now, of course, we go back to Great Britain and the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was what brought about the modern world, or so official history tells us. And it actually started with the development of agricultural processes, improved agricultural processes. And they say that they improved crop yield beyond the growth of the population. And you do see some numbers that verify that, especially if you look at Ireland and how their population grew immensely from 1790 right up until the potato famine, unfortunately. Now, whatever you think those events really are, what was really going on, it is interesting how there does seem to be a little bit of cause and effect, but it's spread out over a couple decades. But you have the ability to produce more food, you have more people are surviving. So this apparently led to technological innovations. Now, they already had the great looms, the great textile mills, but the Industrial Revolution expanded them and it changed the culture and the society. Of course, if that's the case, then why do we have multiple phases of the Industrial Revolution, including the one after the American Civil War? Mm, indeed. Yeah, exactly, Heidi. And I think there's facts. I think there are some events that are shared in the official history, but how accurate is it? That's what it's really hard to see. Yeah, you're right, Julia. That's a great point. And there's a reason behind that. I mean, it's hard to find anybody, and it's nobody's fault, but it's hard to find anybody who can still even interpret or read cursive writing, let alone doing it. I mean, I learned how to do it, but sometimes I have to think and focus to do it because it's been a while. I mean, I'll be honest, when I take notes, I take it in manuscript because I've gotten out of the habit of writing in cursive writing. Yeah, exactly. Dribbling out the old tech and dribbling out the ability to interpret the old writings. Yeah. I mean, is it an industrial revolution or an information revolution, Lawrence? I mean, whatever we want to call it. I mean, maybe it's all still part of the same phased plan for all we know. I can write cursive well. Good one. Hey, Nick. Well, and it's not to insult anybody. We don't have the practice of doing it. Everything's digital. Everything's spelled out for you. And so, is there something being lost with that? It's a great point though. Cursive writing, reading clocks, reading old books. And if you can't read old books, well, then can you actually see what's really going on? Or can you actually reference that antiquated technology? And why'd they call them antiquarians? It's a good point, Sky Sage. It's a great point. And then you look at some of the real dark sides of what was depicted with the French Revolution. So remember, this is all going on at the same time. 1780s through the early 1800s, you have all these revolutions. Is it really what's going on that we're told, or is it simply the, dare I say, justification of all the violence that was being employed against certain people? Because in France, we're told, well, the monarchy was evil, the aristocracy was evil, they all needed to die. Now, of course, people say, well, those actions went too far. They, in and of themselves, were evil. But is this really so frequent? Do these revolutions happen? I mean, we've got some examples in the 1900s, especially with the October Revolution in Russia, turning it into the Soviet Union, and then the subsequent revolution in the 1990s. They do happen, but how much are they natural events that come from the ground up from the people? Is it really the will of the people, or is it another example of the will of the people being given to them? What are your thoughts? Yeah, map reading's another great lost one, isn't it, Kathy? I'll be honest, sometimes I struggle to read a map. I'm lost when I'm looking for those old world buildings. I'm just poking around. Where the heck am I? I forgot how to read a map. Yeah, and the 19th century encyclopedias, they do have some great knowledge in them. And they do have references that have just been removed from so many different things, interestingly enough. We live in a simulation. Is whoever has the power and whoever edited history aware of how to manage a simulation? I think we could make the argument no, Elizabeth. It seems as though there is no consistent control, but there does seem to be inputs that are consistent. Maybe that's the best way to look at it. But, the final conclusion from last week's exploration, we just don't know. There are signs that we live in a simulation, and there's signs that it's a controlled reality. And I hate to say, well, it's both, but you know what? I don't have definitive conclusions. But that's why we're here talking about it. And that's what makes it interesting. Hey, Kitch, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. It's more of a ruin of humanity. Yeah, you're probably right, Jamie. In a lot of ways, it is. Illiterate generation being created on so many levels. And you know what? The best example you could probably find with that, and again, I don't mean to be insulting to anybody, it's just what society has come to. We've decreased personal attention spans. I mean, I can think when I was still teaching, the issue was our students have about a 30-minute attention span, and that's max. And that's because that was the length of the average shitcom. But then by 2010, did that study again, and it's about 8 minutes. Granted, this was before the ascendancy of TikTok and the really small length videos. Now, again, I'm not criticizing or castigating that. I'm merely stating that we've intentionally decreased attention spans. And even in longer movies, you can find that. I mean, we have to have something happening instantly. And, you can't go 2 minutes with just focusing on one thought. You have to jump from one thought, one scene to the next. Yeah, 30 seconds. That seems to be the goal, reality check, mate. Because what happens when you decrease attention spans? Well, 2 minutes later, you can tell somebody something completely different. And, oh, that's the reality. That's what's really going on. So it basically makes reality, or if you want to think of it as a simulation, a lot more malleable. You can get over a lot more on people. Perhaps, Stabulator, perhaps. But some people seem to lose that control themselves. Yeah, there's no doubt about it, Battlestar. It is programming. But who's behind it and for what end? That's what we work on trying to figure out. And, who doesn't have attention? Do people try to have attention? Is it a struggle to have attention? You might be surprised to know that I struggle a lot to try to maintain my attention span. But it's true. And I think it actually affects everybody. It's not targeted to one generation. It's just the method of how they indoctrinated the generation changed. They used the most efficient method for each generation. Yeah, in a manner of speaking, you're right. It is. Just how do you get attention? Yes. And all the things that get wrapped around with that, Sky Sage. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, nobody ever talked about who had that, or, they didn't talk about memory problems either. There was no references to Alzheimer's or any of that stuff. Now you could just say, I hadn't discovered it yet and put the money into it. But, is that really what's going on? Memories of goldfish. Don't bore us. Get to the chorus. Yeah. I remember when Roxette, if you remember that band, they even had that as one of their album names. Don't bore us, get to the chorus. Yeah. Do I think you should give up? No, nobody should ever give up. There is no reason for any of us to give up anything. But ultimately, it's up to you to decide. I just don't think anybody should. Yeah, and you're right, Nick, because nobody can control what they saw. I mean, whether if it's Generation X, you can't control that you saw sitcoms all the time and movies were already starting to change. If you're Generation Z, you can't control that. I mean, that's the environment you're in. The best you can do is try to become aware of it and try to expand yourself on your own initiative. Yeah, and definitely not. Well, there are plenty of monasteries out there. Really be cool if we could find an actual old world monastery, or at least one that's intact. I do wonder about that. But going back to the revolutions, you look at some of the old iron bridges that they built, and here in this one in England, and this was one of the very original ones. And again, you can see some advanced architecture in this. I mean, no one's building iron bridges like this today. Now, am I saying we can't do this today? No. But I am saying I'm very impressed that this was done in the 1700s. This is the oldest iron bridge in England. And this all came from that time from the Industrial Revolution. So again, is it people discovering new things, or are they rediscovering or having different knowledge that was reintroduced to them? Because maybe all they did was they just cleaned it up and got it back in service. It's hard to say. There's also the conflict that we had going around, especially with these revolutions. And, oddly enough, revolution didn't end with the Age of Revolution, because you might recall in the 1840s, we had the social revolutions that again hit the same areas. Now, they were somewhat successful, but they didn't last for all time. Yeah. That, and you know what, warrior class, that's a lot of what it is. Well, we're only done if we think we're done. I don't think we're done. And so that's why we just have to keep going on, and we have to keep improving ourselves and share with anybody who has that open mind and that desire to learn. And believe me, there are people out there that will surprise you. No, it's not easy to find them, and it does take a struggle. I'm not going to say it's easy. Hey, QCZ, good to see you. And look at that, you're heading right for your 1 year membership. So appreciate that. Yeah, we have been. And it's funny because of the way that it's changed. What you've really seen that's changed from, say, the early 1900s to now, or even going all the way back to what we're informed happened at the end of the 1700s. Was it nationalism, or is it a different form of nationalism? Is it a different form of an international movement? Or has the conflict between national and international perceptions just been that? Are we just talking about a battle of ideas? A battle of ideas that's not real. I mean, if you think about it, that's what all these revolutions were about, officially. Covers for natural disasters? Yeah, probably. Or on the other hand, Brett, maybe what was really going on is in the wars were an excuse to cover the disasters, or the disasters were excuses for the war. I mean, it could go both ways. I mean, I'm not saying I know, but there's just certain patterns that you see that I think we still see in today. So how long has it really been going on? Maybe much longer than we realize. And then you have these images, and it's funny to me, whether it's a sketch, a painting, or whatever, you always have these gorgeous old world buildings anywhere in France. I mean, France is a wonder. And then you have these unfortunate people that are just being killed. Now, we're told they're the aristocracy, they deserved it. Certain people were saved. But again, there are rumors that they were targeting many different people. And if it was just the aristocracy, well, you're talking, let's be generous, less than 2% of the population. Yet you have other reports that state that much more of the population was killed. Now, again, this is the numbers game, so who knows for sure. But why would this be so ingrained in the collective conscience of people if they weren't killing a lot more and they weren't seeing this a lot more frequently? Not just in certain locations like in Paris, but all across the nation, maybe even all across the continent for all we know. And that's what the revolutions were all about. Yeah, that's true, reality checkmate. You're probably right. Very much so. Inquisition and war, and they tend to go hand in hand. And even controlling people's ideas go hand in hand. It's all good, QCZ. Happens to me frequently. But it's different ideas. It's looking at different ideas and what's really happening. Are they just over yeah, that's a good point, Dwayne. Are they overlapping erroneous information with other erroneous information? What information are we really emotionally attached to? Because yes, we do have an emotional attachment to information. And I think that's what the age of revolution is really all about. Now, if you look at Thomas Jefferson, what was really the story behind him? This was a guy who supposedly loved life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He wrote it in the Declaration of Independence, but what was his presidency really like? What was he remembered for as a president? Was he on the Federalist or the Anti-Federalist Party? What did it all come down to? And you look at this system, and we looked at the medieval manor, and the reason I bring this up is because this was what was in existence in England, from the Middle Ages and onward. And yet they managed to evolve and transform this into the agrarian system with agricultural innovation. But if you look at medieval manners, though, you get the impression that it's representing some different kind of pattern, and that maybe it represented a remnant from a previous civilization, because all they had to do was figure out how the system really worked, and they were actually able to maximize the output of agrarian society. One of the interesting early explorations that Howdy Mikowski did was looking, I think it was one of his first ones, in fact, on his YouTube channel. He looked at the use of grain, rice, and the primary crops that we use, corn, and talked about how agriculture was not necessarily a natural development. And I think there's a lot of evidence to back that up. Oh, thanks, QCZ. I appreciate that. And for all of you who are now members, be sure you thank QCZ. 46, but identify as 19. Yeah, well, for me, reality checkmate. I just listen to that song. What's my age again? Nobody likes you when you're 23. No, I'm not 23. uh, yeah, and there's different variations of corn too. If you ever go to the Midwest of the United States, you should see how much corn varies when you go from Illinois to Iowa to Nebraska to Minnesota, southern Minnesota, that is. I mean, they don't really grow it in northern Minnesota, but anyways. So it's just something else to look with the Age of Revolution. It seemed to be the reintroduction of ideas. It seemed to be another reason to go after certain groups of people. And supposedly it gave us the template that we have. I mean, we look at it, and I'm not speaking this as American arrogance here, but who has the only military in the land that actually goes everywhere in the land? It's the United States. It seems there was something very intentional set up about the United States that was all revolved around this idea. And they say that, yes, the Industrial Revolution started in Great Britain, subsequently the United Kingdom, but the United States picked it up and they did it even better. They built railroads even faster somehow, even though they had disparate groups that were speaking different languages. It's just, that's that American exceptionalism. That's how they did it. Now, you know how I feel about that, but it's ultimately up to you to decide what you think about that. And all these different revolutions with the storming of the Bastille, or what other great fortresses were stormed. Yeah, another example of star forts not working as military fortifications, right? Yeah, and I think that's for whatever reason. And, nobody in the United States ever says, gee, that's a bad idea economically. Nobody ever says that. It's really strange. That is interesting, Chassis. And you know what? The other dynamic with corn, you think about this, is popcorn. I know that sounds kind of silly, but that's actually a food that tends to get thrown around a lot, and it's become a mainstay. And guess where it was introduced? Yeah, I'm sure you'll never guess. The same place that hamburgers and hot dogs were. Dun, 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 the World's Fair. So I'm sure there's somebody out there that'll say that's not true. Well, maybe it's not. I mean, I wasn't actually at the World's Fair. Who knows? Yeah, it's pretty good, isn't it? It's a good little snack, especially with salt. Anyways, so finishing up on revolutions, and we have the Great Declaration of Independence. We have, I think what's really intriguing to me, though, is when you look at just what they were wearing and what you have with these individuals. I mean, there's something really unique about this. The way they're dressed, the opulence that they seem to convey. Now, yeah, this is a painting, and you can say this is just kind of installing the original American mythology of the founding fathers. But you imagine these people with their leggings and their very tight-fitting coats, their suit coats, and then of course the little frills that they had on their shirts. And you can imagine how unbelievably hot that would be. But what was really all behind this? Was this just all an elaborate facade to give us the impression that, yes, we have established a new nation. We've broken free of the old European order, the old world, as they call Europe. But is that really what happened? Or is it really just establishing a new government where there had already been one before and completing a process that was already in effect? I mean, what are your thoughts on it? Yeah, I think you're right, Chassis. It's not practical. And what are you going to say? That, yeah, I'm just going to wear the hottest outfit that I possibly can because that's in style? I don't know. Maybe somebody do that. Exactly, QCC. Because, we don't know. Could be completely wrong on all my theories. 5 eras might need to flush it down the toilet. I always keep that in mind. Nobody knows. And I think that's why it's good that we have different explorers who are actually going in different directions because maybe we are actually getting to the truth in a lot of ways. One of the worst things that can happen, and I saw it in academia, is when you have what's called groupthink. And believe me, that happens very easily. And it doesn't take money, it simply takes the concept of patronage. I want to be liked and I want to be accepted by this person. So I'm going to agree with their research, even if at heart I don't. And I know sometimes people think that I don't respect other alternative researchers, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Even if I don't agree with them, that's okay. I like the fact that we have different views on things. I think that's important. I think it's important to be able to think different ways because that's how we're going to get to the truth. But that's just me. Exactly, Tabor. Exactly. And it's reinforced. It's reinforced groupthink. Research. Do it again. Yeah, exactly. You need to do more research. Oh, yes. I've had $1 for every time I heard that one. And whether you're look at the original Declaration of Independence and they talk about how amazing it was that John Hancock signed it, and this was treason, and everybody else they signed it to where they couldn't see it, and they talked about how wonderful it was. Or if you remember those National Treasure movies and how they talked about the fact that, oh yes, there's a treasure map on the back of it. Sure, don't ever make me watch those movies again. Nothing against Nicolas Cage. Movies just didn't appeal to me. And then there was even a lot of people forget about the Irish uprising that occurred in the late 1790s when there was an attempt by Ireland to actually break free as their own nation from the United Kingdom, following from, well, it wasn't the United Kingdom yet, it was Great Britain, following from the earlier revolutions of the United States and France. And of course, it failed. And then, coincidentally, just a few decades later, then the famine occurred. Although Ireland always seems to have drawn special attention from, if you will, the powers that be. Wonder why. I'll leave that to you to decide. And then for the final image on this, so after we had our Declaration of Independence, after we had our Constitution of the United States, we had the Whiskey Rebellion. And that was where some farmers who were veterans of the Revolutionary War, no less, decided they didn't want to pay taxes on the whiskey because it was unfair to them, because the new nation needed to levy taxes according to the Constitution. And they assembled a militia from other states to go to Pennsylvania and put down this Whiskey Rebellion. And thus began several great American traditions, constantly neglecting the needs of veterans, constantly using military forces from other locations to pacify certain locations. And it's continued to this very day. Now, you might say that's controversial, but that's what happened. I mean, what did happen in the Civil War? And that's the official history. That's what it tells us. You have this centralized authority. Does the president have authority or doesn't he? I mean, we try to argue the president shouldn't have unchecked authority, but everybody seemed completely all right with it when it was Lincoln in the 1860s. Oh, well, that was for a good cause. Well, is it by the Constitution or isn't it? What makes the founding fathers correct to have revolted from Great Britain, but makes the rebellion, the farmers from the Whiskey Rebellion, incorrect? Well, you know what it is? I'll tell you. It's what we tell you. That's the authority. And you better step in line. Now, you might think that's an extreme view, and that's okay if you do. Yeah, exactly, Sky Sage. Rules of engagement, don't shoot the officers. Yeah, and it's there's a lot of great old world communities. It's a beautiful area in Pennsylvania too. And it's just another example though. I mean, and there's many odious situations, and I do call them that, where the United States did not remember its own veterans. I mean, this is just one. It's happened many times. I'm not diving into a political debate here. I mean, it's historical fact, whether it was this or the March of the Bonus Army. I mean, whatever. Oh, 2027, huh? I wonder where she gets that from, Tabor. Somehow I got the feeling that it's not going to be that easy, but that's just me. I could be wrong. Well, you could argue that the president already was prior to that. It's really hard to say. Anyway, I did not mean to spend this much time on revolutions, but it is interesting. But it's something I'll leave you with to think about. What was the revolution really about? Was this really the start of the post reset period? Was this really where they got things going to transition to where we are now? They put a lot of the basic ideals in place. They said, yes, we will take it out on aristocrats and monarchs. Revolutions can happen. Sometimes they succeed, sometimes they don't. It's the will of the people. But the reality is, it's all a big chess game, and you're not the one playing chess. And even if a pawn becomes a queen, you're still just another player on the board. Oh, Robert. Well, that's why you got to read the teleprompter, obviously. All right, well, with that, we'll transition to our next topic, and we're going to talk about Captain Cook's marvelous voyages. And I'll transition images before we go on a little bit of a break here. So heading over to Captain Cook. I've been wanting to talk about this one for a while. I just hadn't gotten to it. I was looking for a good spot to put him in. But since he just happened to be in that age of discovery in the 1700s, so let's get his image up there. And there he is. Bears a striking resemblance to actor Julian Glover. You might remember him, Walter Donovan, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, General Veers, Empire Strikes Back, the most competent Imperial officer ever depicted on screen. Of course, now they're just all yelling, screaming buffoons. But this was in the distant past, the 1980s. Anyways, I always thought he looked a lot like Captain Cook. And if you ever watch the film Treasure Island from the 1990s, the one with Charlton Heston, he plays Dr. Livesey, and he looks exactly like Captain Cook. So, yeah, all a big coincidence. Captain Hook, Captain Cook. Yeah, it's a good point. Names are quite a bit, aren't they? All right. Okay. Well, we'll get to Captain Cook. We're going to take a 2-minute break. So take your break, and I'll see you in 2 minutes. Oh, before we take break, be sure you hit that like button. I appreciate you supporting the channel. Please keep sharing your ideas. Remember, all ideas are welcome. And it's good to see everybody here. And with that, we're going on intermission. Be back in 2 minutes. All right, thanks for standing by, everybody. We are back from our 2-minute hiatus. And the first thing we're going to do is talk about Captain Cook's marvelous voyages. Now, what does anybody know about Captain Cook, aside from the fact that he bears a striking resemblance to Julian Glover? What have people said about Captain Cook, especially when it comes to Antarctic or the Antarctica? By the way, no, Captain Kirk, I was being facetious. Captain Kirk, the great explorer. Bad joke. Okay, I'll spell it out more next time. Captain Kirk. Yeah. I had to get at least 2 Captain Kirk references in this exploration, all right? Oh, well, yes, he was searching for the Southern Passage. We'll talk exactly about what he's attributed to historically. But that's one of the things he was doing, although it's quite interesting when you look. What's that, Sky Sage? Cooking the books, yeah. And how fitting on that name, right? Cook was a crook, yeah. And to a lot of people, he is, especially indigenous peoples. They don't have a good reputation concerning Captain Cook. You might recall a couple years ago, they went after several of his statues. So, you know. And that's the other point, Lawrence. Some people say that there was documentation that his explorations, he sailed 60,000 miles. Now, did he? What did he find? What didn't he find? Well, we'll talk about historically what he found and what he didn't. Yeah, indeed, Peter, indeed. Yeah, colonizer, and that's what he's associated with. Oh, very good, Cindy. Yes, he was looking for the Northwest Passage, much like we talked about in The Terror in that TV show. That was actually a pretty well done TV show on A&E with our venerable Captain Franklin and his attempt to find the Northwest Passage. Although Cook did it much earlier because he was just that awesome of a guy. So anyway, on with Captain Cook. So British naval officer, and he lived to be 50 years old and served during what we're going to talk about at the end of the exploration, the 7 Years' War. He was a master navigator, a master cartographer, and he showed his capability in being able to make maps. And he charted the St. Lawrence Seaway, and he allowed General Wolfe to move in there and fight his famous battle, which allegedly allowed the British to capture the colonies from France and end the 7 Years' War favorably for Britain. That's the official history. But this guy was he was an awesome map maker and great cartographer. And so as a result, they commissioned him to conduct this voyage of exploration, these voyages to explore unique areas because he was a really good map maker. And here he looks more like Ray Fiennes, I think. Ray Fiennes from the 1990s, but okay, enough of the jokes on that. But we look at his first voyage. Now, this is the path that his first voyage took. And so after Captain Cook had shown himself to be this master cartographer, do you know that the goal of his first voyage, and you can look this up yourself, was to watch the passage of Venus? So science, that is the Royal Society, could determine how far the sun is from the Earth. I'm not kidding. That's the stated goal of his first voyage. We're going to sail all the way down here in the southern hemisphere. At least that's how we say the shape of the land is from the mainstream perspective. And we're going to measure the passage of Venus in front of the sun to use that to determine how far the sun is from Earth. In the 1700s, they were apparently interested in that. And that was the whole purpose of his first voyage. They promoted this guy to lieutenant, gave him a ship, and off you go. And that's what they did, and that was the first voyage. Does that sound just a little strange to you? Hey, Limited State, good to see you. Yeah, just a little strange. Yes, that's actually how he did end, Mystic Q. They got him in Hawaii. We'll get to that in a second. Well, who knows what he found? I mean, alternative researchers suggest that he did sail 60,000 miles and was unable to find any sort of passage through the ice wall. But we're just looking at the official historical account of his voyages. So his first voyage, measure the passage of Venus in front of the sun. Oh, anything's possible. Could have also just been shot down by the Japanese. Who knows, Adam? Or maybe there was some other mission we don't know. Well, was it the 1700s fairy girl, or is it what we think of as the 1700s, but something else we just don't know. He got chopped. Yeah, no doubt about it. Oh, goodness. Okay. Quick mic check. Can everybody hear me all right? My signal strength seems to be dropping a little bit. Just somebody give me a 5 out of 5 there on the comments and let me know you can still hear me because we're going to the next part of Captain Cook. Yeah, story sounds suspect. That's true. Captain Cook, Captain Kirk, whatever you want to call him. Ray Fiennes, Julian Glover. Okay, good to go. So he succeeds in this first voyage, gets himself promoted from lieutenant to commander. Let's go on a second voyage. Now, the second voyage was to ascertain if there was a continent, Terra Australis, or whatever that was they called it. I mean, I suppose I could look it up, but I'm not inclined to. They were looking for a landmass that was further south. Now, this is where he really discovered the existence of New Zealand, sailed all the way around New Zealand for the first time, Australia, and that's why he has an affiliation there. During the second voyage, he never actually went and discovered Antarctica. They say he just missed it, but he never actually discovered Antarctica. But he gave a negative confirmation that there was no continent further south of Australia, New Zealand, or South America. There was, he didn't find it. At least that's what the mainstream says. And this was the voyage where he sailed 10,000 miles in about, I think it was 4 to 5 months. So very intriguing, isn't it? Now, is that really what happened? Did he really take this course? Did he really discover these things? Or was he just the guy that they pinned the tail on? Or was he someone who was contracted by the new powers that be to understand if there were access points? I mean, what are your thoughts? There's all kinds of possibilities with it, and I think that's what makes it interesting. Ah, yeah. Drake equals dragon. True that. Francis Drake. He did. And supposedly that's where there's initial British claims to California. I wonder, would they take California? I don't know. Oh, thanks, Julia. I appreciate that. It's a good point, Battlestar. I mean, you can do the time distance analysis, and in the average sailing ship prior to building the really fast ones like the Cuddy Shark, they could do, I think it was about 9 miles an hour on a good day with a good wind. But yeah, I mean, covering some serious distance in a pretty short amount of time. It's impressive if you take it at face value. Don't worry. They've already taken care of it. You don't have to worry about anybody being concerned about wanting to go down there. Yeah, everything is weird about that area. And not just the date line, but also when you look at time zones, focus on time zones between Alaska and Eastern Siberia. Tell me what you see there. I'm not going to point it out to you because we know what'll happen to this video, but just look at it. Look at this voyage of Captain Cook, this second voyage. What was it really about? How far did he actually go? And then his third and final voyage. So after he gets back from the second voyage, in which, he was considered the master mariner, the explorer, even the Americans respected him. They said, don't attack Captain Cook. And so he came back on a third voyage, went to Hawaii, and this is the one where he was looking for the Northwest Passage. Well, they say things didn't go too well. He had a stomach ailment. He started to act irrationally. That's what the official account says. So he goes back to Hawaii, tells his crew that they're going to snag, steal, take some wood from some of the locals' burial grounds, which, they took exception to. And so they retaliated by stealing one of his boats. And so then Captain Cook goes in there and he's going to take the king of Hawaii, or the chief, however you want to refer to him as, hostage. For some reason, the natives didn't like that and they killed him. And yet we're told in the official account that they respected him so much they returned his body with full honors. So I guess the lesson to be learned here in the 1700s, if you're a nasty dictator, you'll get yourself a good retirement and you'll live. If you're just a ship captain who's a famous world explorer, you'll get conked over the head, you'll die, but your body will still get proper respects. It is a bizarre, bizarre story. And even his attempts to try to find the Northwest Passage were really bizarre. But every attempt to try to find the Northwest Passage, which is the sailing route, we've talked about it many times, going from the Pacific to the Atlantic instead of taking the Cape of Horn or subsequently the Panama Canal once they built it. But yeah, we'll do an exploration on that. Don't worry. But sailing through this lovely area. And of course, you always find ice packs. And officially, it was ice packs that caused Captain Cook to turn back. Apparently, there was no such trouble with ice around Antarctica. Yes, I know. Really, and you've been there. What can you tell us about it? I can't really tell you much about it because I was stuck on a plane and I wasn't flying the plane. So I can't verify what directions or azimuth we took. Try talking to the pilot and you'll get 10 different answers. Well, I follow the air corridor. So, as always, make of it what you will. I don't believe most of our history. I don't even think we are that old. Could be. And I certainly don't want to discount it. And it explains a lot, Nick. It really does. Ah, yes, the telltale sign there. Untraceable lineage. So true. Hey, let's just all hop in our canoes and we'll take enough supplies. I mean, we've got accounts of crew members dying of scurvy, but yeah, we'll jump in canoes and just go across the Pacific. Because as you can see, the Pacific's a very small place, right? That makes sense. I think a lot of it is. I also think a lot of it, there's a lot of truth in it, but it's confused, it's mixed around. Because one of the observations that a lot of people know is that if you factor in a little bit of truth, then you also can make a lie sound a lot more convincing if there's some truth to back up the lie. I'm not going to say that happens in academia. Maybe it's just an accident. Ah, yes. And he got to go back down there, didn't he? Yeah, isn't it odd that they didn't have any issues, and that's not where Captain Cook met his demise, huh? Very strange, isn't it, Vaughn? No, it happened in Hawaii. Yes, convoluted, goes without saying. And some of the charts that he made, one of the things you'll find is that the charts that Captain Cook made were so good, whether it was Newfoundland, we always end up around Newfoundland, Canada now, Gulf of St. Lawrence, and then the charts in the South Pacific. They're so good that they were used until the mid 1900s. So make of that what you will. And yet, this is the Terra Australis, and there is a continent down there, according to the mainstream Antarctica. It's a real continent. But they said that Captain Cook proved there wasn't anything down there. So it's really weird. Second voyage. Read about Captain Cook's second voyage. See what you think. And let me know in the comments. Come on back and make comments on the live stream here and tell me what you think of Captain Cook's second voyage. Was he looking for that? Was he looking for something else? Did this mission even happen? It's really, really bizarre from whatever perspective you look at it from. And then you actually look at how his second voyage was templated. And not once did he ever actually reach the Antarctica. He came close, but never really reached it. So how can you say what's down there or what's not? Don't know. They got some pictures from it, but it's really hard to say. Yeah, no doubt. No doubt about it. Yeah, time traveler. I mean, maybe one. Now, see here, Kirk, when this ship gets up to 88 knots, you're going to see some serious. Okay, I'll just stop right there. Yeah, who knows? I mean, it's a really interesting account, however you look at it. And maybe that's what it really was all about, Jamie. Maybe he was actually trying to find physical passage to other realms, other lands, however you want to look at it. Or he really was just looking for the Antarctica. He couldn't find it. They found it later. I mean, they did confirm it's there. So who's to know, who's to say? Yeah, ding, ding, ding. And I can't say too much, but if you actually look at some of the imagery there, you might be surprised to see what you really find. And certainly want to give a shout out to Nuclear Medicine Man. Check out his podcast. Appeared on his show a couple times, and we talked about the Antarctica on my first appearance there. But yeah, I've been there. At least I was told I was there, and I don't even know what to make of it. So could be. I don't know, Adam. Maybe there's some other force controlling it that we don't know, or maybe we just don't understand it. Oh, that's a good one. What is the meaning of the name? What's the meaning of the name Arctic? Well, actually, you can go back and you can find the original reference to Arctica because they believe there was a continent up there too. But we're not going to get into that this exploration. Yeah, don't they? It's kind of funny. All right. So we'll take a look at neoclassical architecture of 1760. Another one of those times when they rediscovered Roman neoclassical architecture or Greco-Roman. And for those of you who want to know more about Captain Cook, don't worry, there's an exploration coming up on him. So stop sharing, present, share screen, and here you go. So in 1760, they tell us that they managed to discover, or rather rediscover, the very well documented, and yes, they use those words exactly, architectural drawings, renderings of old Roman architecture. And then the next thing you knew, this explains what's called the neoclassical movement. This is the old stock exchange in St. Petersburg. Ah, yes, the old stock exchange. Yeah, it does kind of look like Paris, doesn't it? Nope, good old St. Petersburg in Russia. And so, whether it's Russia or whether we're looking at the British Museum from 1760 to the early 1800s, they built all these buildings. And you know what they look like? They look like buildings from the Roman Forum. You got the pediments, you got the columns, and wherever you go. I mean, some of these, like here, you're in Italy. And I mean, look how advanced and incredible this building is. All these statues and arches. Who could build like this today or with the brickwork? I mean, someone will try, but will it be anything of similar materials? Well, we'll look at that here at the end. Brandenburg Gate, we've looked at this many times, and they've got the famous painting of Napoleon going under it. I mean, what's this all about? And you look closer at it. Yeah, you don't get any more German than Roman, do you? Well, that's because the Germans wanted to be the Romans. We'll forget all about that story with Arminius and Teutoburg Wald and German national sentiment being revolved around defeating the Romans because the Romans were cool, and even the Germans knew that, right? Official history is always so fun to look at sometimes. That's just because these buildings were so cool. That's why everybody did it. Or here in, okay, Edinburgh. Sorry, I'm kidding. Edinburgh. There we go. Edinburgh. See, I can say it. This is very interesting, though. Scotland. So we go from Germany to Scotland. And yes, Scotland, they really thought highly of the Romans. And don't forget that they've got Alexander the Great and his horse out there in front of the city chambers of Edinburgh. But isn't this intriguing here? Where have we seen these before? Nice sphinxes. And then again, yep, Scots, they like the Romans. The Romans are really cool. Alexander the Great was really cool. Julius Caesar, Scottish national hero. I mean, why not? Very, very ornate and detailed on the pediment here. And what's this really represent? Oh, we've seen this symbol before, haven't we? It's not our famous cobra or orb symbol, but something along those lines. But intriguing that this all started from the 1700s. They officially tell us that they got back and they were looking at Roman records. Oh, here's Federal Hall in New York. So same thing. Built shortly after, talking about that whole declaration and everything. And for Metal Gear fans, this is where Raiden defeated Solidus Snake. So there's that. When Solidus Snake fell off the top and collapsed right by the statue. Yep, I'll admit I played that. But, even in the buildings in the background here, I mean, look at this. Columns in the wall. I mean, what came first? How do you really explain it? It's a Sean Connery mausoleum. That's a good one, Albie. I'll have to remember that one. Yeah, it's the pine cone Battlestar. You are correct. That's the other one we see a lot of. So probably Elizabeth. Probably, unless they're torn down or something else came out and smacked them, for all you know. No, this didn't come out well. I was hoping this one would. Plan of the city of Washington, but this didn't come out well, but this is the original plan. Take your time and take a look at good old Google or whatever of the plan of Washington and look at how all the intersections come together. Supposedly, this was inspired by neoclassical architecture. Yes, that's how they try to explain this very intriguing and ornate and elaborate grid pattern with diagonals and intersections in Washington, D.C. And you can also go back and watch it on this channel's exploration that we did of Washington, D.C. And here we're in Helsinki. Yeah, I haven't gotten to the Nordic nations yet. Finland, Sweden, Norway. I will. Don't worry. It's on the list. Very impressive, though. And the same thing. Good old Roman architecture. And then here, I think this one's in the Netherlands, another one of these amazing basilicas. I'm not going to try to pronounce this one, but if you're interested to know, let me know in the comments. Good old dome there with our portals. And then showing our religious figures that may have been added, may not have been added. And yet the Roman wreath up there, the laurel, why not? Because there's nothing that really talks about national pride of Europe and whatever nation you're in than Roman, right? Just like it did for the Germans. Again, just forget about Teutoburg Wald. It didn't really happen. I mean, it did, but it's not affecting anybody. And then the Pantheon in France. So France builds their own version of the Pantheon, but theirs has a nice big dome on it. And again, with great columns. And here we see figures of French resistance. And we'll forget about the whole resistance of the Gauls in France and Julius Caesar's campaign to subdue them. Because again, The Romans are just that awesome. Everybody wants to be like the Romans, right? Ah, yeah, indeed. That's what I would like to do, QCZ. I don't want to see these buildings go the way of the dodo, that's for sure, or everything else that we've lost. Yep, democracy, the gall. Well, because you just can't get enough of them, can you? They're everywhere. They're nowhere. And then many of our arches of triumph, although you might look at one of the recent explorations in Des Moines, and we saw that they had an arch of triumph out in front of the Iowa State Capitol. So who knows how widespread these things are. Yep, nothing says French like Roman, right? Or Gaul like Roman. This is the Palace of Justice, Brussels. We looked at this. Now that is a big door. Do my best Jeff Bridges there from Tron. And again, massive columns integrated into the walls. Now you can tell they're sectional, but still, just the size and immensity of this place, the Palace of Justice, and I know many alternative explorers have looked at it, quite intriguing and quite impressive. And in Nova Scotia, and yet we see the same foundation stones. I mean, this could be the Boone County Courthouse in Iowa. I mean, it's the same look, but it's because everybody wanted neoclassical. Or wherever you go, any small town. Oh, I have the stairs and the entryway down there. Nice window, huh? Oh, I like these little wagon windows here too. Here you go. Slant construction. Or maybe it's just blocked by the hill. I'm trying to remember where this abbey is. I think this might be Germany. I'm just pulling up all the examples of neoclassical that came when I did the quick search. And now, how do we do it today? We say that neoclassical survives to this day, but here we have in Guatemala. And to be fair to Guatemala, they do have legitimate old world buildings, but they're trying to sell that this is what we can do to this day. And you might recall when we talked about the quote unquote counterfeit old world, this is their efforts to match what came in the past. And while it's a good effort, whether we're looking at a college in the UK or Guatemala or whatever, they make good efforts to try to replicate it. But if you actually go up and you assess the materials, just knock on them or look at them, you can get the feeling that something's off, that this is not the legitimate old world. Well, for one, you don't have the size and complexity, even though they did much more magnificent large buildings, whether it's the St. Paul's Cathedral, the Iowa State Capitol, in the 1600s or the 1800s, but now, we don't need to do them that large. So this is how we match it. This is how we tell you we can still do this to this day. Now, for some people, this is enough. It's nowhere close to enough for me, but if it's enough for you and you're convinced, hey, it's all good. But just giving you an idea of what they try to do now. Ah, yes. And you should check out Adam Baum's channel. He did a little exploration where he looked at some of the modern building materials. It's quite interesting. Yeah, intention is all is right. Yeah, you don't need those, right? You don't need those at all. Yeah, they do. And I do still like that hotel. I'm not going to lie. I do really like that hotel they have there. The one they don't use. They just broadcast stuff on it. So good question. Very good question. So anyway, this is how they try to match neoclassical to this day. Like you can see, and this is another university, is this a more legitimate or old world building? And here is the facading. I mean, you can even look at the symbols. They're trying, but you can tell something just seems a little off on this. Or are they just labeling them differently? For me, I wouldn't make the final determination where it's close like this unless I'm actually on site and I can evaluate the construction. But there are signs that this one might be a little not quite on the level. Don't know. But we know that they're trying to confuse and obfuscate the past. And so that's what we have with neoclassical architecture. Yeah, there you go. A for effort. That's right. I mean, they tried, but okay, then let's build the big ones. Let's build the big, beautiful state capitals, the cathedrals. Why aren't we doing that again? Why don't they want that for the NATO headquarters? We'll build a brand new NATO headquarters. It's going to be a big, giant dome building that you can see for hundreds of miles. Everybody knows about it, but nah, we don't need to do that. Ah, yes. Well, and there you go, Heidi, because everybody's not a craftsman. So, anyways. Well, I know I'd said we were going to talk about the 7 Years' War, but you know what? In recent research, I found there's a lot more to that. And some other alternative researchers call it World War Zero. So we're not going to get into the 7 Years' War in this exploration. It's going to be its own exploration. Probably going to do a couple regular videos on it, and then we're going to do a full live stream on it. So we'll look forward to that. Well, yeah, Elizabeth, and isn't it funny when you look at the NATO logo and you see how it's reflected under it? It's just one of those little interesting details. So, oh, thanks, QCZ. I appreciate that. Yeah, exactly, Barbara. Not many craftsmen, but lots of laborers. And remember, everybody's distracted by their mobile devices now. So, we don't have the artisans and the craftsmen. Although the funny thing is, when you look at the population of many towns across the United States in the 1800s, the ones where they listed the profession of every individual there, you will not find a single stonemason or brickmaker in the lot. You'll find a couple carpenters who are also tasked as builders. So as I'm famous of saying, make of it what you will. Come to your conclusion. Well, yeah, and we could also look at that with the urban renewal of the 1960s. No matter where you were in the land, we need to bring these buildings down. We got to make way for great tenements. Yeah, that's good. So anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this exploration, and I wanted to get into the 7 Years' War, but I don't want to go too far because I think that deserves its own exploration. There is a lot of interesting detail in the 7 Years' War, as they call it in the United States and Canada, the French Indian War. There's a lot of details that actually spin into other details that come up later, things that don't get talked about so much in history. So I want to be sure that we cover that. So, in any event, before we go, I just ask that you hit that like button. Appreciate all the support for the channel. And thank you, everybody, for the memberships. And for new members, make sure you check out the member content. And if you want to become a member, completely up to you. I don't advertise it. I guess I am kind of right now, but members support me and I make content to say thank you for the members. And that's the principle behind that. But we'll come back to the 7 Years' War and we're going to do a live stream probably before the month is out that's going to be focused on the 7 Years' War. The original World War, if you will. What was that all about? What did that lead to? But hopefully you enjoyed this live stream, and I appreciate everyone coming. And you all have a great week. I managed to restore 2 of the videos that we lost, and they will be coming out in a compilation video this week. And I know a lot of people are asking questions about them. So, again, appreciate all the support and looking forward to live streams down the road. And you all have a wonderful week. And it was great to see everybody. And please hit up all the comments that you want to. Go ahead and we've lost Reddit apparently, but feel free, comment here. YouTube's good. Hit me up on the comment section and still on Twitter. So, anyways, everybody have a good week. Thank you for joining us. And this is Lucius Aurelian signing off.